Well, I want to bring you back to that top story, the breaking news that we told you about right at the beginning of the program, coming in from Australia. A magnitude 6.0 earthquake was detected around Mansfield, northeast of the city of Melbourne in the state of Victoria, around 9:15 a.m. local time. We're hearing reports of damage and being felt as far away as Sydney, where we can now speak to our correspondent, Phil Mercer, who has been looking into this, or following this story for us, I should say. Phil, in the first instance, just talk us through what's happened, any details of that you're getting about the damage that has been caused by this.
We're still getting reports, Karishma, of the aftermath of this earthquake. It was a magnitude 6, about 100 kilometres from the city of Melbourne, and seismologists say that the shakes and the earthquake were felt as far away as Sydney. So this is a considerable distance from Melbourne, and that just gives you an indication as to the force of some of these shudders that rocked parts of Victoria and further afield. We are getting reports that people have reported quite significant damage in parts of the state of Victoria. This all happened within the last hour. So the authorities are now racing to assess the scale of the damage. People are saying on social media how their homes shook, how they were terrified. And I think it's safe to say an earthquake of this scale in Australia is extremely unusual.
Yeah, highly unusual, Phil. I mean, some statistics coming through from Australian authorities that in the course of a year, typically you see about 100 earthquakes in Australia measuring over the magnitude of 3. In neighbouring Indonesia, for instance, which sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, it's around 11,000. Just talk us through, the fact that this is quite rare in Australia, and what preparations people have typically had to take in order to prepare for something like this.
I don't think people would pay too much attention to earthquakes in Australia. The vast majority, as you say, here in Australia, there aren't many of them compared to neighbouring countries. Would most of them, if not all of them, would go unnoticed. You think of countries such as Indonesia and New Zealand, that's known as the Shaky Isles. New Zealand suffers about 14,000 earthquakes each year. About 100 are noticeable. Here in Australia, we simply don't have the same sort of problem. There was a very significant earthquake in the city of Newcastle quite a few decades ago. So it does happen here, but it is extremely rare. And in terms of people being prepared for earthquakes, I don't think people usually give them a second thought. If you speak to people in those other countries, New Zealand and Indonesia, it's a very different story. And this is why this event in Victoria is unusual. It would be spreading a lot of fear and concern, especially when, as I say, Karishma, you read those stories on social media, people being in their homes and very violent shaking in some circumstances. And we're getting reports that there has been significant damage in parts of the Australian state of Victoria, and also some apartment blocks in inner Melbourne are being evacuated. So Australia might not necessarily be prepared for earthquakes of this scale, but certainly they're having to react to what is quite a significant event here.
Thank you there to Phil Mercer, who has been following that breaking story for us in Australia, the earthquake that's taken place in just the last hour in Australia. They will be sure to get more for you on that story as and when we are able to.